It's really fascinating to see the change in Ubisoft games over the last year, and sure you could say, what a change. Their AAA single player titles are still open worlds filled with icons and upgrades, and sure that is true, but they had this philosophy, this blueprint and trend they wanted to apply to every game, but that totally backfired. And still though, with the recent games, we see that kind of DNA shine through a bit. It's not completely gone yet, but this shift away from that idea does tell us more about the future of Ubisoft games that seem to be way more diverse than before. But they still need to prove though that they can execute on all these new ideas. So in this Sunday Jorgameshow, I want to go over recent Ubisoft trends. We of course look at recent gaming trends every Sunday here on the channel, and I also answer one of your questions at the end of the video. So a like would of course really help me out. And let's go. Congrats to Tristan for winning my giveaway for a 2021 game of your choice. I've emailed you and I already started a new giveaway which you can enter via the link in the pinned comment. And these giveaways are for subscribers of the channel only. Good luck. I still remember going to a Ghost Recon Breakpoint preview event. This was actually where they announced the game and we saw that highly scripted gameplay demo that promised a gritty, more realistic and less forgiving stealth game. Where a headshot would obviously kill an enemy and you also had to keep an eye out for injuries and take the time to patch yourself up. At the end of the event, the one more thing caught me by surprise though. They showed this teaser for a raid coming to Ghost Recon. It looked awesome on this volcano island, but it also really felt out of place. This was in May 2019, The Division 2 just launched a few months ago and of course also has its own raid-like activity. So Ubisoft was now making two military third-person shooters with RPG elements and launching them in the same year. Why does Ghost Recon need a raid? This was going through my head, and well, that was before we knew that the plan was to turn Ghost Recon into a Destiny type game with a gear score and gear rarities to pick up. That only became clear though closer to launch, when we actually were able to see the UI and the inventory menu. They totally seemed aware that nobody wanted this, so they kept it a secret during the reveal and everyone seemed excited until they found out that Ubisoft had completely wrong intentions with the franchise. The main reason the drones and tanks were added was to have a sort of realistic bullet spongy enemies, so there was a need to grind gear. Because human enemies, of course, still had to die with one headshot. Around this time, it was very clear that Ubisoft was turning all their franchises into RPGs. Far Cry New Dawn released in early 2019 and suddenly had damage numbers, ranks for weapons and enemies, meaning that if you had a low rank gun, you would almost deal no damage to high rank enemies. In Far Cry 5, it was no issue to kill everyone instantly with a shotgun or the Desert Eagle they added after launch. But in New Dawn, there was this RPG-like progression system where you were playing to get better versions of guns to kill higher rank enemies, or you could also spend money to immediately get the upgrades you needed. And also Watch Dogs Legion was victim of this. We saw that in the gameplay stream they did at E3 2019 when the game was revealed. Your characters had levels back then and perks would unlock the more you leveled up. Also, districts in London had a recommended level, meaning that a level 2 operative would likely not be successful fighting level 7 enemies. You could see the level from the enemy next to their health bar. Ubisoft saw that turning Assassin's Creed into an RPG with Origins did great for the franchise, doubling the sales of Syndicate, and the player engagement increased thanks to people spending more time in the world, so they then also spend more money on extra content. RPG games also did better on PC, and PC gamers are even more hardcore according to Ubisoft, so even better customers. Odyssey continued and saw a ton of sales, especially post-launch, and the player engagement was even higher than with Origins. Now Valhalla has double the amount of players as Odyssey at launch. But what Ubisoft did not realize is that the RPG blueprint doesn't work for every game, or actually it only seemed to work for Assassin's Creed. Far Cry New Dawn did not set the world on fire, and Breakpoint turned out to be the perfect title because it was indeed the breaking point for this formula. I mean, apart from shoehorning in the RPG elements, there was way more wrong with Breakpoint. It had an unexciting and way too large world, the missions were not appealing, it lacked a soul really, and after like 10 hours the game had nothing new to offer. And you likely remember what happened now, right? This was the end of October 2019, so a little over a year ago now, which is wild, it seemed way longer ago. Either way, Breakpoint flopped and The Division 2 did not meet expectations. So Ubisoft delayed all their upcoming games. Watch Dogs Legion, Gods and Monsters, Rainbow Six Quarantine, that of course still isn't out, Roller Champions. And then we heard about big internal changes at Ubisoft. They were trying to make their games more varied. They were basically changing their whole creative structure. Now selected people were in charge of one franchise and focused on that, instead of having just one group that would have a say and apply things to every Ubisoft game. And I still think it's interesting that even with these changes, like Watch Dogs Legion of course lost the whole leveling system, the 40% extra grapple damage we could find on characters at E3 2019, turned into actually cool weapons and unique perks. But there's still this raid-like activity coming to the online multiplayer. We only have some B-roll of it now that Ubisoft shared last year, but I think this totally shows you that before Breakpoint released, they had this idea to turn the Watch Dogs Legion online multiplayer into this MMORPG as well, where you likely had to grind to be able to do the raid eventually. Luckily they also changed that, because now we should be able to jump into the raid and all the other online activities immediately with no level requirement whatsoever. Ghost Recon Breakpoint did a full 180 as well, adding the immersive mode after launch, with the key feature being no gear score. They also added a private mode to their Destiny-style social hub. And I totally think that Far Cry 6 will now also go back to being this more regular, realistic shooter, something that players expect from the franchise instead of a Borderlands-style game. Ubisoft learned their lesson and seems now way more focused on making sure the core identity of a franchise shines through, and maybe they aren't chasing that online-only Destiny-type experience anymore. Because after the Breakpoint disappointment, Ubisoft actually cancelled a new Destiny-like IP from the Watch Dogs 2 team they were already working on for 3 years. Likely because this wasn't worth the investment anymore after 2 of their live service games had flopped. And we now also kind of see this with the Division 2 team that is now working on a story-driven Star Wars game instead of another online ongoing title. They still have that Avatar game coming though, which seems more like a Division type project, but maybe that also went through some changes after the Breakpoint debacle. But we are now also seeing a Prince of Persia Sands of Time remake, which if successful could maybe spark a new game in that series. The remake got delayed by the way a few days ago, hopefully to improve the overall quality. And Roller Champions again was also delayed after the Breakpoint sales and seems to be way more feature rich now than when it first was announced. That Ubisoft is enabling more time for new projects is great, but the reality also is that right now only their biggest brands seem to be super successful. Valhalla set records, Just Dance was the perfect home workout game, and of course Rainbow Six Siege is still the biggest thing they got going. But really, apart from that, it's all just fine. Where EA and Activision can successfully launch free-to-play games, Ubisoft struggles big time with new titles like Hyperscape that were already dead on the launch. It will be very interesting to follow to see if they still have it in them to launch new IPs successfully, like they did at the start of the last generation with Division 1, Watch Dogs, and For Honor. And then I of course mean in terms of sales, like the Division is still the biggest launch for Ubisoft ever. But yeah, all of these new IPs launched this generation are still around, but not as big as they were before. At least Ubisoft is moving away from making everything an RPG, and they also got rid of some toxic leads like Surge, who also had way too much power to cancel things. He did not like fantasy games, so look at the AAA lineup from Ubisoft. Where are the fantasy games? So hopefully that means that we see a more varied lineup moving forward. They now seem to focus on the things that make each franchise great. The big question still is though if they will be as successful with new ideas during this generation as we saw during the previous one. Another thing that was very interesting about the Breakpoint situation was of course the monetization strategy in that game, and I would not be surprised if one of the reasons that Ubisoft moved into the RPG direction was because of the increased monetization options. Everything in Breakpoint was for sale in the shop as well. Sure, you could get it in the game, but pay $2 now and you would immediately unlock it. I made a video back then saying, hey, this is crazy, we should be worried about the next Assassin's Creed, and now with Valhalla, we are reaching a point as well where it's just getting a little too crazy. This Reddit post got a ton of traction the last week, and it basically echoes a video that I made on January 2nd, where right now there are more Helix Store armor sets in the game that we can use in England versus like regular armor sets. So it's really interesting that Ubisoft still hasn't like figured out a way to do monetization in their game without like causing a ton of uproar. While, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think Activision with Call of Duty, while like being in the spotlight for many years, has kind of figured a sort of nice leeway out, and EA with Apex Legends as well. So Ubisoft really needs to improve here too. Although I think that releasing a ton of free content and some much needed extra features will already help in Valhalla, although it's getting pretty crazy. And you likely know my stance on this, right? Like, my main goal here on the channel is to keep you up to date on everything that is going on in the games that I cover. So for Valhalla, that includes the paid items that can then also at one point appear at Reda. But like, when there's stuff that needs to be talked about, that I don't think is fair, that I want Ubisoft to improve, then I will discuss it. Like, I was the first to actually talk about this topic that is now getting a ton of traction thanks to that Reddit post. Because we all want the same thing. We all want Ubisoft to do better, and we all just want a fun Viking game to get lost in. Okay, before I answer one of your questions that you can of course leave in the comments under every Sunday video, and then I might answer it in the next Sunday video, I first want to talk about the outpouring support I saw for that Winx Club Netflix TV show. I was making fun of it, it was on the dashboard of the TV, I saw the trailer, looked pretty bad, but actually many of you like reached out in the comments saying that it's actually quite fun and that it's a good binge watch show, etc, etc. And I gotta admit, my girlfriend finished it as well this last week, and I saw it here and there as well. Saw like some cool college moments with some magical elements here and there. Didn't look as bad as I thought it would. So I'm gonna take it back. I'm gonna give Winx Club the seal of approval. It is better than I expected. So there you go. I wanted to get that off my chest. Okay, now let's go to a legit question. We got fingers crossed here in the comments saying, could the new game, so the new Assassin's Creed, not maybe be an Assassin's Creed 1 remaster? If it's going to be a more linear AC game, what do you think? I don't think that the next Assassin's Creed we will see will be the remake, because then the rumor would be that the next Assassin's Creed we would see is a remake. I totally think at one point in a few years we will see Assassin's Creed 1 remake, because if Ubisoft doesn't do it, they're leaving money on the table. They know that as well. I think it will happen maybe after the new game from the Valhalla team, in another like in-between period, while we wait for the next big open world RPG, we're getting a remake of AC1. But I don't think it will be the one we see early 2022, according to those rumors. We hopefully get a better idea of Ubisoft's plans already on Tuesday, February 9th, because that is when they will do the financial call. I'll be listening, I'll be reporting back. I totally think there will be some interesting news, not like gameplay specific, but like more a broader view of what they have planned for the next year. Gonna be cool. Subscribe to stay up to date on that. A like on the video would of course really help me out. And you can totally check out my previous Sunday video on those new Assassin's Creed rumors by clicking on the screen. For now, I will speak to you next time, and goodbye.